I spoke to the President of the United States multiple times tonight on behalf of the President. His prayers are with all of us, all of the Jewish community, everyone in Washington, D.C., state, local, and federal agencies, and our great U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, who will be prosecuting this case, will be doing everything in our power to keep all citizens safe, especially tonight our Jewish community. Our prayers go out. We have the FBI. All of our federal agencies will work hand in hand with you, Chief, as we have done, and you, Mayor, to do everything we can to keep our citizens safe. We will follow the facts. We will follow the law. And this defendant, if charged, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
We are covering the breaking news as tragedy struck last night in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill as 2 Israeli diplomats were murdered in cold blood outside of an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum. The man who was murdered was a Israeli but born originally in Germany. His soon-to-be fiance was born in Kansas and now is an Israeli citizen as well. The man in the situation is a Christian believer, and they had planned to get married. These are young people in their 20s and 30s. And it's an unfortunate situation to happen, but of course it's happening because of the rise of not only anti-Israel, but anti-Semitic rhetoric that is happening throughout this country right now. You know, I wouldn't have been surprised to wake up and hear this happen on the streets of Tel Aviv, and I guess that's sad, or hear it happen on the streets of Jerusalem, or even in some other countries. But now it is on our doorstep. Our office is blocks from there in Washington, D.C. This was a targeted murdering of 2 people just because of not only the government they work for, but because of their beliefs and their background, because of their cultural ethnicity. And you could come up with a lot of different reasons. I heard some really horrible versions of this will go, well, it's not about the fact that they're Jewish. It has to do with, they're working for a government. I was like, why are we justifying murder ever? I don't believe you should be able to walk the streets of America with any religion, with any background, with any creed, without anything, and not have to be worried about being murdered because of maybe who your boss is or because of where your family came from. But this is what's happening. So if we start justifying any of this, then we gotta stop. Now, President Trump has responded, so has Pam Bondi. President Trump's was in text. He put, these horrible D.C. killings based obviously on anti-Semitism must end now. Hatred and radicalism have no place in the U.S. Condolences to the families of the victims. So sad that such things can happen. God bless you all. So a very simple, poignant statement from President Trump. And there was also a response from Pam Bondi. There's been a response from Dan Bongino, from many others. I mean, obviously a lot of people are calling out saying how horrible this is. But again, also remember what kind of media you're taking in. I'm not going to call anyone out by name, but you know that there have been people on the right who have decided to take a pretty strong anti-Israel stance. And no, they're like, well, we could be anti-Semitic. You don't have to be anti-Semitic to be anti-Israel. But then they turn to anti-Semitism. They turn to the old blood libel, the old ways of throwing in essentially the controlling of the world, the controlling of the media. And you know who I'm talking about. Start getting your mind clear. I'm not saying you don't need to listen to certain people, because look, it's okay to hear others' point of view. But remember what this ends up pushing. Ends up pushing for 2 people about to get married on the streets of Washington, D.C., getting murdered in the name of this chaos. Now, I think you need to also hear, and I think we have this bite, which is a clip from one of the leaders of Hamas. One of the leaders of Hamas went on a podcast and talked about, what he loved? He loves seeing what's happening on those college campuses in America. Do we have that?
Yeah, that's bite 4. We're going to go ahead and roll that.
Who could have imagined that students in America at universities from which the politicians graduate would protest against their leaders and against Zionist occupation and say that Palestine must be liberated from the river to the sea? Not just the 1967 borders, like most of our Arab leaders say.
They oppose the Zionist enterprise in its entirety.
Right, this is a dream come true. Today, the number of Muslims is multiplying because of what is happening in Gaza. Today, Gaza is giving a new interpretation to the Holy Quran. People used to read the verses, but perhaps did not understand what they meant. Now, when they see what is happening in Gaza, they understand the meaning of many of these verses because of many details that are evident every day in Gaza. So, what is happening in Gaza is not about 100 destroyed houses or 1,000 martyrs. The story is much bigger. Gaza today has taught a lesson not just to the occupation, but to the Islamic nation and the world. The implications, fruits, and outcome are extensive. We will rebuild the houses and will produce dozens more babies for each martyr. They are the price we need to pay.
One of the leaders of Hamas doing a podcast interview, again, not only talking about like what I was discussing, which was, could you imagine the students in the universities, as they graduate, would be protesting there on the university campuses? This is, again, Hamas celebrating what's going on in America. And then talking about, they talk a lot about life and whether life has any real meaning to the people in Hamas. And they say, no. I mean, they're at least admitting it. Saying, look, we don't care if it's 10,000 babies. We'll replace those babies 4 times. That's the price to pay. That's where we're at. So remember, when this person claims to have been instigated by what was happening in Gaza and the lack of humanitarian aid, of course, the alleged lack of humanitarian aid, which, by the way, the BBC had to retract a good portion of that statement. They said 14,000 children were going to die within 48 hours, and then they had to come back and go, oh, we meant 48 months, maybe it was a correction. And allegedly, that's one of the things that motivated this shooter, was seeing that in the news. So when you create lies, this is what happens. When you push a rhetoric that goes beyond just disagreeing with the government, but starts calling for people, calling for global conspiracy from a certain group of people, then you know where it's going to head. And then you hear there, of course, in those comments, and a lot of people have asked about what some of the responses are from maybe the other side. We've heard now from Dan Bongino. We've heard from President Trump. We've heard from A.G. Bondi. But what about someone like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar? Let's hear what she had to say today.
Congresswoman Omar,
anybody safe?
Can I get your reaction to the shooting that happened in D.C. last night?
I'm going to go for now.
I'm going to go for now. So, couldn't even have anticipated that. Congresswoman Omar, we know you have no love for the Jewish people. We know you have no love for Israel. But how about you come up with a half-sentence answer that could at least maybe calm people down? But instead, you knew you were going to get asked this. You knew it. First thing, you knew you'd be asked this. But of course, you just say, I'm going to go for now.
And what we have seen also, though, there are people on the Democrat side that have issued stronger statements, obviously, than Ilhan Omar.
Well, hopefully. There's not really a weaker statement you can make.
The governor of Pennsylvania, who himself was targeted on Passover because he is Jewish and supports Israel, Josh Shapiro, he issued a statement and tied his own experience with he and his wife were also got engaged in Jerusalem, very similar to what was about to happen in just the following weeks. And he said, Yaron and Sarah should have had the same opportunity and a life together far beyond what their murderer cut short. May the memories be a blessing and a call to action for each of us. And I agree with the governor here. One, he has been a victim as well of this hatred and this targeting because he is Jewish and supports Israel. And it should be a call to action.
Yeah. Well, between him and Fetterman, I think you're going to have a large group of Democrats that are no longer Democrats very soon. I think you're going to see them shift. Now, do I think they're going to become Republicans? Maybe not. But you have a wake-up call both sides of the aisle here. You either can condemn this and actually condemn what's happening and actually wake up to murder happening on your own streets, or you're going to stay silent still, or you're going to condemn Israel still only. You're not going to have the important conversations. You're going to say, I'm going to go for now. But it's time we call it out where it needs to be called out. If this had happened on the streets of Tel Aviv, on the streets of Jerusalem, I would be, upset. But sadly, that's become a fairly regular, commonplace thing over the years. But now it is on the streets of our nation's capital. Now the blood is on the streets of Washington, D.C. Obviously, we all have our own reactions to it, but I'll just let you speak here, Jeff.
the contextualization of this, whether it's the murderer himself, and apparently there's a manifesto, or it's the media that have been doing this from the beginning, or it's the terrorists who perpetrated October 7th, the atrocities against the Jews, and then try to cast themselves as victims. That's what always happens. You know, there's for 2,000 years, there were many corners of the world in which Jews were being killed and Jewish life was cheap. And the argument that, well, Jews killed Jesus, so it's not only okay, but it's somehow morally good that every Jew who ever exists, who lives anywhere in the world, is appropriately held accountable and appropriately targeted as a victim. And that's what, in this generation, is the entire notion of the Palestinian. You know, they say Jesus was a Palestinian. Obviously, it's absurd. Jesus existed well before the concept of Palestinian was ever created. But it is true in the reverse, which is, you know, it seems to be that Palestinians are all Jesus. And somehow every Jew in the world, everywhere, their lives are cheap. Their lives are acceptable and understandable when they're killed. And this idea is, it's not only that it's sick and disturbing, it's the same idea that destroyed civilization after civilization around the world. This idea that we want to find someone to hate and blame. Let's pick on the Jews. Let's find some way to make them the eternal outsider, some way to blame them for everything. And so every Jew becomes a victim, but it does damage not to the Jews as well, but it does damage to the society that does it. And the fact that this is now here in America and that this has become normalized by politicians, by the press and media, and it's taken up on college campuses, et cetera, this is the result: murder.
We are so excited to announce the ACLJ's brand new app, completely redesigned to provide you with the best tools available to partner with us at the ACLJ. You can watch the daily Secular program, sign the petitions, customize your ACLJ membership experience, donate with the click of a button, and receive up-to-the-minute critical updates that the mainstream media can't censor. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to your phone's app store, search ACLJ, and click install. It's that simple.